Welcome to how Ruby's instance exec works. Here's what we're going to do in this video. First, we're going to review how to pass an argument to a block in Ruby. Then we're going to talk about how to execute a block in a different context, and we'll talk about what a context is. Then we'll talk about the main context versus custom contexts. And finally, we'll talk about why instance exec is useful. Let's get started. First, as a reminder, when calling a Ruby block using block.call, you can pass an argument and the argument will be fed to the block. We're doing this on line 2 of this example. The block is being called using block.call and the argument that's being passed is the string hello. When our word fiddler method is called, our value hello that we pass gets used for the variable word so that when we do word.uppercase, the result is an uppercase hello. And you can see here that when we run our program, that's exactly what we get. Now, in addition to this way we've just done, we can execute a block in a different way. Here we're not calling the block using block.call, but rather we're using something called instance exec. And look on line 5, there's no argument to that block. And on line 6, instead of doing puts word.uppercase, we're just doing puts uppercase. And the reason we're able to do this is because we've changed the execution context for this block. And we'll see a little bit more in a second about how contexts work. But the important thing for this example is that the execution context for this block is now the hello object. And so when we call puts uppercase, uppercase gets called on the hello object. So the behavior and output for this example are identical to the last example. It's just that the way the code is expressed is a little bit different. Let's now go back to our first example, but let's add a line. Here's the original code, and here's a version where we've added puts self, which will show us the current execution context. When we run this code, we see that the current context is the default context, which is an object called main. Let's now run our second example in this way so we can see its execution context. Here's the original code for our second example, and here's our code with the put self line added. When we run this code, we can see that the execution context is not main like the other example, but the hello string that we passed to the block. Now before we conclude, let's talk about why instance exec is useful, and we'll use an example from FactoryBot as an illustration. The code in this example consists of 2 blocks, one nested inside the other. There are 3 methods being called in this snippet, or more precisely, there are 3 messages being sent: factory, first name, and last name. Who is the recipient of these messages? It's not the main object, because there's no method called factory, first name, or last name defined on the global scope. The reason these messages can be sent is because the execution context is being changed, and these messages are being sent to certain objects that respond to them. If it weren't for instance exec, we would maybe have to do something kind of inelegant like this, where we would have to explicitly use arguments in order to send our messages to the right recipients. So there you have it. Thanks to instance exec, the DSL syntax for libraries like FactoryBot, RSpec, and many others can be much less verbose. Thanks for watching this video. To find my blog posts, products, podcast, and other videos, visit codewithjason.com.